It's William Cooper. This is my ring lapping lab. Doing it today on the 15th. Got my instruction book here. Now, what I've done to make this a little bit easier and a little bit more realistic actually is this is what I'm using, let me show it here, is one of the side mounts off of the one of the AKs that I had. When I rebuilt it as a side folder, I didn't throw a rail on the side, I just left it slick. So I just got this thing sitting around. So I'm using this to align the mounts. Now, I'll bring this closer. These mounts actually aren't horrible. There's a little bit of lapping to do on them to get them back into round. Of course, when I tighten them down, I'm trying to make sure I'm putting equal pressure on each screw so that I'm not torquing anything, equal distance on any kind of gap on either side of the scope rings, making sure everything's tightened down even, basically. So I'm not pulling anything to one side or the other. So the alignment, like I said, isn't horrible. It isn't perfect. Got a little bit of lapping to do on it, and it should line up pretty well. And some of that's going to be scope rings, bases, and some of that's probably going to be this rail. This is a lower end rail that I'm using for this thing. So the scope that I had on it, just to show you, I think it's a it's a 4-power 30mm tube. Nothing special. It was just something to throw on top of it, just for an optic. Like I said, I don't use that anymore. That gun's been completely rebuilt, so now I'm using this rail to do something like this. And it'll be just for good demonstration purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and get set up. I've got the lapping bar, lapping compound, and everything. I'll go ahead and get set up. Okay, so getting ready to lap. Just pulled regular old Q-tip. Loosen up the rings. And I'm going to get some lapping compound on the inside of these rings. Decently even. And with them loose, I'll slide the lapping bar in and then tighten that lapping bar down to where it's decently tight, but I can still move it. Too easy. Loosen that up some more. And then of course when I tighten everything down, I'll try to tighten everything down to where it's even pressure on all sides of the rings. That way when we're actually lapping, we're getting an even lap on the rings. There we go. Got that tightened down. Let's see. This is the side that's a little looser. It's actually decent. It loosens just a little bit. I'm trying to turn that. I want to make sure I'm getting it even on that lap. Kind of, again, making sure I got that even pressure. Check that in a second, and recheck the alignment. All right, so just for another view, you can actually see the coat of the lapping compound on the lapping bar. See, it's nice and even. And that, putting a little wiggle on it, but it's actually, I don't want to go too far. I don't want to overlap it, but I want to make sure that that's at least knocking off that internal finish that could be causing some alignment issues. Okay, so I got the scope rings opened up. I'm just wiping off the lapping compound now, and then we'll check the alignment with the pins again, and we'll see how good we are. You can see places on the rings where, of course, you can see more removal of the finish in some spots than you can in others. I mean, you know, this stuff ain't perfectly round. Anything mass manufactured is not going to be perfectly round. So you can see some places where you got a little bit more finish left than others. Same thing on that ring, a little more finish than some place in others. But what it really is you're knocking down the high spots and getting those spots that are kind of out of round or a little out of shape into the shape of that machined bar, which is what you want. Just don't want to go too far to where you basically have to put shims into the mounts to hold the scope in place. That's not what I want to be doing. Trying to put something behind there to really get a view of the alignment, and it looks almost dead on. Okay, so just tried to get a better view of the actual tips of those pins. It's so fine, I'd try to put something behind it to show, but equal spacing on the sight rings and everything. It looks like those tips are just about perfect. So I think that's really got it. And didn't have to remove a whole hell of a lot of material. It was more just kind of smoothing everything out, getting those high spots out. And that alignment is, and it's hard to tell in the video, but it's almost just spot on. So, could I get a little bit better? Yeah, I could probably get a little bit better. But it's not much. You're talking thousandths of an inch. So, okay, I've got everything wiped down, got everything cleaned up. For a mount like this, remembering that this would come on the left side of the AKM that it was mounted on, to determine my scope ring distance, I wanted to give this thing enough shift to where I could really get that scope moved back in cases for eye relief and things. If I was mounting this on an actual gun right now, of course I would come through and I would put levels up here. I would level the gun itself, make sure the bases were level. That way when I set the scope in, I can completely straightly level out the crosshairs. This one, for this project, since I'm basically mounting on an imaginary gun, the process is just going to be tightening down rings, making sure there's equal pressure on each side of the ring. Typically, when I do my final tightening, I'm going to do it kind of crossways. So I'll tighten here, tighten up this base, and then I'll swap, tighten this base, tighten this base. That way I'm trying to make sure I'm keeping equal pressure all the way around on the scope. I don't want to have a good scope and then tweak it by putting too much pressure on one side of it versus another. Getting everything in round's great, but you could still kind of screw some stuff up if you're not tightening down those bases properly.